George III. I was the leader of the British Empire and the longest reigning monarch England ever had. I felt that the American colonies England set up were under my control. The Americans demanded certain freedoms. With the support of Parliament, I would not hear of it. My advisors passed laws to tax the colonies, and since the rebels continued to cause problems, I sent troops to America to stop the revolution. The die is now cast. The colonies must either submit or triumph. We must not retreat.
I am John Adams. I am a member of the Continental Congress and leader of writing and adoption of the Declaration of Independence. My wife, Abigail, and I were outspoken in the separation of Great Britain. I was critical of Britain's taxes on the colonists, declaring the tourists oppressive. I nominated George Washington to be Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Forces, along with Benjamin Franklin negotiating the Declaration of Independence. I was the second President of the United States and the second President of the United States in 1797. Without the pen of the author of Common Sense, the soil of Washington would have been raised in vain.
I am Alexander Hamilton. I was an officer in the War for Independence and an advisor to George Washington. I fought in the battle at Yorktown and felt a strong federal government was necessary to maintain freedom. I worked with James Madison, writing the Federalist Papers, in which we defended and helped in ratification of the United States Constitution. I was the first Secretary of Treasury. On July 11th, 1802, I died in a duel with Aaron Byrne. Vigor of government is essential to the security of liberty. About face! Forward march!
I was an English-born American who wrote a pamphlet called Common Sense. Common Sense was the first publication that convinced colonists to take arms against Britain. I also read the American crisis during the Revolutionary War, with George Washington directly encouraged them to fight for independence. I felt that American survival depended on a break from England. I also felt slavery is wrong, so I wrote about the enslaved African Americans. These are times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot, when the crisis, shrink from the service of the country. Tyranny is not easily conquered.
I am Phyllis Wheatley. I was one of America's first poets and the first enslaved African American to publish a book, which was signed by John Hancock. As a young girl, I was kidnapped and brought into the colonies as a slave. The Wheatley family named me Phyllis after the ship that brought me to America from Africa. They treated me as their own daughter and encouraged my talent for writing by providing a good education. I wrote poems about my faith, famous people, and the fight for independence from England. After the Siege of Boston, I wrote a poem about George Washington, which Thomas Paine published. Washington enjoyed it so much that I was invited to read it to him. I gained my personal freedom shortly after. Life is a severe schoolmaster, which its frowns are less dangerous from its smiles and flatteries, and it is a difficult task to keep in the path of wisdom.
I am Nathan Hale. I'm athletic, strong, and also kind. I was also a schoolmaster, and also I graduated from Yale. I soon got a letter from George Washington to become an officer for the Army. Then I became a spy for him. Sadly, I got hanged on November 2nd, 1776. About face.
I am Christmas Detox. I was one of the first Americans killed in the early fight for independence. I escaped slavery and worked as a sailor and note maker in Boston. On March 5, 1770, when British troops were mistreating colonists, I led a rally march against them. When somebody in the crowd yelled fire, I was shot twice in the chest by the British. This event was known as the Boston Massacre. After my death, patriots reminded each other about my brave sacrifice, and I became a symbol for the African American abolitionist movement. A brother indeed is a brother indeed.
I served as the first governor of Virginia and supported the colony's fight for freedom from the tyranny of King George III. Even so, I opposed ratification of the United States Constitution, stating that it gave too much power to a national government, but did help influence the creation of the Bill of Rights. I was outspoken against the Stamp Act and believed colonists should only be taxed by their own legislatures. I gave a speech which convinced leaders to prepare troops from Virginia for war. I may know what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death. The Constitution is not an instrument for the government to restrain the people. It is an instrument to restrain the government.
My name is Paul Revere. I was a silversmith, an artist, engraving an illustration of the Boston Massacre in which Chris Detox and 4 others were killed by British soldiers. I was a member of the Sons of Liberty and participated in the Boston Tea Party. I was an American carrier and delivered important information to patriot leaders. I am famous for riding my horse to warn the Minutemen. I, along with William Dawes and Samuel Prescott, spread the alarm that the British regular army was coming. The colonists armed themselves against the British troops and fought in the battles of Lexington and Concord. I was stopped by the British a few miles beyond Lexington and never made it to Concord. There's a time for casting silver, a time for casting cannon. If that isn't in the red, it should be.
About face! Forward march!
I'm Benedict Arnold. I was considered one of the worst traitors in American history. I played an important role in the Battle of Fort Ticonderoga, Lake Champlain, and Saratoga. I got angry with General Washington that I did not receive the full amount of money, promotion, and recognition I thought I deserved. As a result, I sold American movements and plans to Major John Andre for 20 pounds. As I fled to America, escaped to England, but I never received the full amount of money I deserved. Let me die in own uniform, which I fought my battles in. May God forgive me for putting on another one.
I am Martha Dandridge Custis Washington. Before I married my husband, George Washington, I had never gone outside the colony of Virginia. I spent half the war with my husband near the Army's camps. I spent the cold winters in Valley Forge and Morristown. I organized women to seek donations of money, food, and fabric to supply soldiers fighting for our freedom. Many women of the camp sewed shirts, knitted socks, and mended clothes. My presence lifted the spirits of my husband and colonial soldiers. The greater part of our happiness or misery depends on our dispositions and not our circumstances. We carry the seeds of one or the other in our minds wherever we go.
I am Mary Draper. I wanted to help the colonies during the American Revolution but had no skill for fighting. I lived on a farm and decided to use bounty from our fields to supply marching soldiers with bread, cheese, and cider set out on a table in front of my home. After the Battle of Bunker Hill, ammunition was in short supply, so I decided to melt down all my family's pewter forms. The metal made wonderful musket balls for the soldiers. Many of the soldiers needed shirts and coats, so with the help of my daughter, we sewed from cloth I had set aside for my family's use. I knew freedom was more important than my family's things. Food must be prepared for the hungry, for before tomorrow, hundreds, I hope thousands, will be on their way to join the Continental forces. Some who have traveled far will need refreshment, so you and I, with Molly, must feed as many as we can.
About face.
am Abigail Adams. As wife of John Adams, our second president, I strongly supported education for women, even though I had no formal schooling. I worked hard to become a strong reader and writer. During the war, I managed our farm in Massachusetts, taught our children, and progressed my political views in letters written to my husband. I was my husband's key political advisor during the war and while he was President of the United States. Learning is not attained by chance, but must be sought for ardor and attended to with diligence.
I am Betsy Rex. I am credited for sewing the first official American flag. In 1870, my grandson told me the story of how in 1776, George Washington and 2 other men from Congress came to my house asking for help. Washington showed me the design of a 6-pointed star, but I took a piece of paper, folded it, and with a single snip of my scissors, produced a symmetrical 5-pointed star. During the Revolutionary War, I was a seamstress and upholsterer, making tents, uniforms, and more flags. Congress adopted the national flag on June 14, 1777, which is now known as Flag Day. Today, the American knight holds the commercial supremacy of the world. About face. Halt! Attention! About face! Forward march!
Militia, are you ready? see all those famous words. You know. Look so cool. I felt so scared when you were charging. Being British and all, you know, it was just a little bit scary when the revolutionaries come to get you.
It was scary.
Awesome job, Mrs. Schisnewski.
They did the work. They did the work. My patriots and everybody else.